My name is Mia, and I am 32 years old. After years of saving every penny from my software engineering job, I finally bought my dream home last month. The feeling of having my own space after years of overpriced rentals was indescribable. I decided not to tell my parents immediately because they have a habit of inserting themselves into every decision I make. Little did I know that keeping this secret would lead to finding my front door lock completely changed one day after work. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button and prepare yourself for a family drama that might seem familiar to many of you. For the past 5 years, I have been working as a software engineer at a major tech company in Chicago. The job pays well, but living in the city is expensive, and saving for a house deposit seemed like an impossible dream at times. I cut back on everything from coffee runs to vacations. My coworkers would jet off to tropical destinations while I stayed home building my savings account one paycheck at a time. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with barely enough room for a bed and desk, sharing a bathroom with 3 other units on my floor. The sacrifice was worth it because I had a clear goal: financial independence through homeownership. My relationship with my family has always been complicated. I love them, but there is a dynamic that has existed since childhood that I have never been able to shake. My parents, Richard and Patricia, have always favored my older sister, Isabella. She was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the odd one out, the one who never quite fit their expectations. Isabella married young to Tyler, had 3 kids, and settled into the picture-perfect family life my parents always wanted. Meanwhile, I focused on my education and career choices that my parents never fully supported. Isabella and Tyler have always lived beyond their means. Their houses too big, their cars too expensive, and their vacations too lavish. Tyler works in sales with an unpredictable income, while Isabella has been a stay-at-home mom since their first child was born. Despite their financial instability, my parents have always been there to bail them out, something they never did for me when I struggled during college or when I was laid off early in my career. Moving day arrived on a sunny Saturday in April. I had hired a small moving company to handle my limited furniture, but most of my possessions fit in my car. After years of living in cramped spaces, I had learned to live minimally. The movers were efficient, and by noon, everything was inside. I tipped them generously, then stood alone in my living room, surrounded by boxes and endless possibilities. That first night in the house was magical. I ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on the floor making lists of furniture I wanted to buy and projects I wanted to tackle. The house creaked and settled around me, each sound a reminder that these walls were mine. I slept on a mattress on the floor of the master bedroom, but it was the best sleep I had gotten in years. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into making the house a home. I painted the living room a warm sage green, installed bookshelves in the reading nook, and splurged on a comfortable sectional sofa. I scoured thrift stores and estate sales for unique pieces with character, slowly filling each room with items that spoke to me personally. The dining room table came from an elderly couple downsizing after 50 years of marriage. They told me stories about family dinners and holiday celebrations around that table, and I felt honored to give it a new chapter. The vintage desk in my home office belonged to a retired English professor who assured me it had been the site of countless graded papers and written lectures. Each piece had history, adding layers of meaning to my new beginning. It was during my second week that I met Eleanor, my neighbor to the right. She was in her 70s, a retired librarian who had lived in her house for over 40 years. She brought over a homemade blueberry pie and welcomed me to the neighborhood with genuine warmth. "I watched the previous owners come and go," she told me as we sat on my front porch. "This house has good bones and good energy. I can tell you will be happy here." Eleanor became my informal neighborhood guide. She pointed out which neighbors were friendly and which kept to themselves. She warned me about the temperamental mail carrier who required careful handling and recommended the best local shops and restaurants. She told me about the community gardens 6 blocks away and the monthly neighborhood association meetings that were surprisingly entertaining due to ongoing drama about holiday decorations. As she was leaving that first day, Eleanor mentioned something that seemed insignificant at the time. "This house reminds me of the old Peterson place over on Maple Street, same architectural style. Were they built by the same company, I wonder?" I shrugged, not knowing anything about the house's history beyond the basic disclosure documents. I made a mental note to research it sometime, then promptly forgot as I became absorbed in work and the daily tasks of settling in. My daily routine in the new house quickly became my favorite part of life. I would wake up naturally around 6:30, make coffee in my beautiful kitchen, and sit in the backyard under the oak tree planning my day. The commute to work was actually shorter from my new location, giving me extra time in the mornings to read or tend to the small herb garden I had started in containers on the patio. Evenings were spent on home improvement projects that felt more like therapy than work. I researched paint colors obsessively, reading design blogs and visiting hardware stores to collect sample cards. I learned about plants from YouTube videos and neighborhood garden center staff who were patient with my beginner questions. I taught myself basic carpentry skills to build shelves and repair minor issues around the house. The sense of pride I felt in each small improvement was unlike anything I had experienced. When I successfully installed a new light fixture in the dining room without electrocuting myself, I felt more accomplished than I had after completing complex coding projects at work. When I painted the guest bedroom with soft lavender and hung curtains I had sewn myself, I stood in the doorway admiring my work with satisfaction that was purely personal. By the third weekend, I felt ready to share my achievement with my closest friends. I planned a small housewarming gathering, inviting only the people whose opinions I truly valued and whose support I could count on unconditionally. Maya, my best friend since college, arrived first with a potted plant and a bottle of champagne. We had met in the computer science study group and bonded over being the only two women in our program. She understood the challenges I faced both academically and personally, having grown up in a similarly controlling family environment. Her support had been crucial during the Marcus breakup and countless other family crises. Sophia and her husband Cameron brought a gift basket of kitchen essentials, high-quality olive oil, gourmet spices, and artisanal pasta that represented the kind of indulgences I could finally afford now that I was not paying Chicago rent prices. Sophia worked in marketing at a different tech company, and we had connected through a professional women's networking group. She and Cameron had bought their first house 2 years earlier and understood both the challenges and rewards of homeownership. Ethan, my colleague and friend from work, contributed a smart home system that he insisted on installing immediately. Ethan was one of those naturally helpful people who genuinely enjoyed solving problems for others. He had helped me debug countless coding issues at work and had become a trusted friend despite our very different personalities. Where I was cautious and methodical, he was spontaneous and optimistic. The evening was filled with laughter, tours of each room, and endless discussions about paint colors and furniture placement. My friends admired the vintage details I had preserved and the personal touches I had added. They offered suggestions without being pushy, shared stories about their own decorating mistakes and successes, and made me feel proud of what I had accomplished. As we sat around my new dining room table, enjoying takeout Chinese food and wine, the conversation flowed easily between work gossip, weekend plans, and home improvement advice. For the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed and happy. This was exactly the kind of life I had envisioned when I started saving for a house. Meaningful friendships, personal space to entertain, and the freedom to create an environment that reflected my values and interests. Then Maya asked the question I had been dreading, but I knew was inevitable.
The table went quiet as everyone looked at me expectantly. I took a long sip of wine, buying time while I decided how much to reveal about my family situation. These were people who cared about me, but they came from families that functioned differently than mine. I was not sure they would understand the complexity of keeping such major news secret. They do not know yet, I finally admitted. Sophia nearly choked on her drink. What do you mean they don't know? Mia, you bought a house. That is huge news. Most parents would be thrilled. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as I tried to explain my reasoning without making my family sound completely dysfunctional. It is complicated. They have strong opinions about my choices, and I wanted to make this decision without their input for once. I get it, Cameron said, leaning forward with understanding. My parents are the same way. They would have had opinions about everything from the neighborhood's safety to the age of the electrical system. Sometimes it's easier to present them with a done deal rather than invite their input during the process. But keeping it secret indefinitely seems extreme, Ethan countered gently. They are going to find out eventually, and won't it be worse the longer you wait? What if they drive by and see your car in the driveway? What if a neighbor mentions it to someone who knows them? Maya, who had met my parents multiple times over the years and witnessed their dynamic firsthand, gave me a knowing look. She understood better than the others why I had made this choice. "How long are you planning to wait before telling them?" she asked. "I don't know. A few more weeks, maybe? Just long enough to feel settled and confident about my decision before dealing with their reactions." "What kind of reactions are you expecting?" Sophia asked. "Are they not supportive of your career success generally?" This was the heart of the issue, and I struggled to articulate it without sounding like I was complaining or seeking sympathy. They're proud of my career in theory, but they always find ways to express concern or suggest I should make different choices. When I got promoted last year, they worried about the increased stress. When I mentioned wanting to buy a house, they suggested I should wait until I was married so I would have help with the responsibilities. "That's ridiculous," Cameron said. "Single women buy houses all the time. It's actually a smart financial move, especially in this market." "I know that, and you know that, but my parents still think in terms of traditional life timelines. In their minds, I should have gotten married after college, had children by now, and made housing decisions as part of a couple, rather than independently." Maya pulled me aside later when we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. "I understand why you did this," she said quietly, her voice filled with the compassion that had sustained our friendship through countless difficulties. "But secrets have a way of creating bigger problems than the ones they're trying to avoid. The longer you wait, the more hurt they will be that you kept this from them." "I know you're right," I admitted, feeling the weight of the secret I was carrying. "I just want to enjoy this achievement on my own terms for a little while. I want to wake up in my own house and make coffee in my own kitchen and sit in my own backyard without having to defend or explain my choices to anyone." "That is completely understandable," Maya said. "You have every right to enjoy your success. Just don't wait too long to tell them. The right time has a way of never arriving, and the longer you wait, the more complicated the conversation becomes." Her words stayed with me after my friends left. I cleaned up the dishes from our gathering, enjoying the domestic routine of caring for my own space. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Maya was right. The secret was already becoming a burden, coloring my enjoyment of the house with anxiety about eventual discovery. I walked through each room, touching the walls, the furniture, the objects I had carefully selected to create my sanctuary. Everything felt perfect exactly as it was, but I knew that eventually I would have to share this space with my family's opinions and reactions. The knowledge that this peaceful independence was temporary hung over me like a storm cloud on an otherwise beautiful day. Still, I wasn't ready to give up my secret yet. I wanted more time to establish my routines, to feel completely settled and confident in my ownership before opening myself up to family drama. I told myself I would wait until the house felt completely like home, until I could defend my choices from a position of strength rather than uncertainty. Looking back, I realized I was naive to think I could control the timeline of revelation. I had underestimated my family's network of connections and their determination to stay informed about my life, whether I wanted them involved or not. The peaceful weeks I thought I was buying myself were actually the calm before a storm I never saw coming.
The pattern of parental interference in my life is long and frustrating. When I received a scholarship to MIT for computer science, my parents insisted I attend the local state university instead to stay close to home. When I dated Marcus, a wonderful man who happened to be divorced with a child, my parents made their disapproval so clear that it eventually contributed to our breakup. When I was offered a job in Seattle at a prestigious tech firm, they guilted me into turning it down to stay in Chicago, claiming my aging grandmother needed me nearby, only for them to rarely visit her themselves. The MIT incident still haunts me. I had worked incredibly hard throughout high school, maintaining a perfect GPA while teaching myself programming languages and participating in every math and science competition available. When the acceptance letter arrived with a full scholarship, I was euphoric. This was validation of everything I had worked toward. But my parents immediately expressed concern about the distance, the academic pressure, and whether I was ready for such independence at 18. They presented their argument as loving protection. MIT is so competitive, my mother said. What if you cannot handle the pressure? What if you have a breakdown so far from home? They painted University of Illinois Chicago as a safer choice, offering to pay for dorm housing as an incentive. At 18, I did not have the confidence to recognize this as manipulation. I thought they knew better than I did about what was best for my future. The Marcus relationship was even more painful because it lasted longer and felt more serious. Marcus was a graduate student in engineering, 5 years older than me, intelligent and kind in ways that made me feel valued for who I was rather than who I was supposed to become. He had been married briefly in his early 20s and had a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie who spent weekends with him. I adored Sophie, and she seemed to genuinely like me too. But from the moment my parents met Marcus, they began a systematic campaign to undermine the relationship. They questioned his motives, suggesting he was looking for a convenient babysitter rather than a genuine partner. They expressed concern about dating someone divorced, worried about what extended family would think. They planted seeds of doubt about whether I was ready for the responsibilities of dating someone with a child. The pressure was relentless and subtle. During family dinners, they would ask pointed questions about our future plans, whether I had really thought through the implications of becoming a stepmother. They shared stories about friends whose relationships had failed due to complications with children from previous marriages. They never directly told me to break up with Marcus, but they made their disapproval clear in dozens of small ways. Eventually, their constant negativity wore down my confidence in the relationship. When Marcus proposed after 2 years together, I panicked and asked for time to think. The engagement ring sat in my dresser drawer for 3 months while I agonized over a decision that should have been joyful. Marcus was patient at first, but as weeks turned into months without an answer, he began to withdraw emotionally. Finally, he gave me an ultimatum, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. He needed to know if I was committed to building a life with him and Sophie. I chose my family's approval over my own happiness, telling myself I was being mature and practical. Marcus moved to Seattle for a job opportunity, and I cried for weeks knowing I had made a terrible mistake. My parents were relieved and supportive, telling me I had made the right choice. But I felt like I had lost not just a boyfriend, but a future. 3 years later, when I was offered a position at a prestigious tech firm in Seattle, the irony was crushing. The job offer was everything I had worked toward: a significant salary increase, cutting-edge projects, and the chance to work with industry leaders. But my parents intervened again. This time, their argument was that my aging grandmother needed me nearby, that I was the only grandchild responsible enough to help care for her. They painted a picture of duty and obligation, making me feel selfish for considering a move across the country. They promised that staying in Chicago would pay off in the long run, that opportunities would come to me if I was patient. I turned down the Seattle job, a decision I regretted
almost immediately. My grandmother lived independently for 3 more years, and when she did need care, my parents hired professionals rather than asking for my help. The manipulation was clear in retrospect.
This pattern of control disguised as concern had shaped every major decision of my adult life. I had learned to second guess my instincts, to seek their approval before trusting my own judgment. But something about buying a house felt different. Maybe it was my age, maybe it was the confidence that comes with financial stability, or maybe I was simply tired of living my life according to their expectations. So when I finally saved enough for a down payment and started house hunting, I made a conscious decision to keep it to myself. No input, no criticism, no attempts to steer me toward a house near them or away from neighborhoods they deemed unsafe. This was going to be my decision and mine alone. The first major life choice I would make without family interference. The house hunting process was exhausting but exhilarating. I spent 3 months viewing properties every weekend, researching neighborhoods, and calculating mortgage rates. I created detailed spreadsheets comparing properties, took extensive notes during each showing, and slowly developed a clear picture of what I wanted in a home. Some houses were immediately eliminated. Too small, too expensive, too much renovation needed. Others seemed perfect on paper, but felt wrong when I walked through them. I was beginning to worry that I was being too picky when Julia showed me a charming 2-story home in West Ridge Gardens. The moment I walked through the front door, I felt something I had never experienced before. A sense of belonging so immediate and powerful, it took my breath away. The house was built in the 1920s with hardwood floors throughout, large windows that filled every room with natural light, and a small reading nook under the stairs that seemed designed just for me. The kitchen had been updated thoughtfully, preserving vintage elements like the original farmhouse sink while adding modern conveniences. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms included a master suite with a clawfoot tub that promised relaxing evenings after long days at work. The backyard was small but perfect, with a mature oak tree providing shade for a flagstone patio where I could imagine reading and entertaining. The asking price was $325,000, at the very top of my budget. But I knew immediately this was my home. I submitted an offer that same day with a personal letter explaining how much the house meant to me. The sellers, an elderly couple who had lived there for 30 years, accepted my offer the next morning. The inspection revealed only minor issues, a few loose shingles, some electrical outlets that needed updating, and a small leak under the kitchen sink. The mortgage approval process was nerve-wracking, despite my excellent credit score and stable employment. But everything proceeded smoothly, and the appraisal confirmed I was making a sound investment. The day I signed the final papers was one of the proudest moments of my life. Sitting in the title company office, signing document after document, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was purely my own. I had done this entirely, without financial help from anyone. When the title agent handed me the keys, I felt like I was finally becoming the independent adult I had always wanted to be. As I drove to my new home that afternoon, keys jingling in my pocket, the spring sunshine seemed to celebrate with me. I had taken the rest of the day off work to simply sit in my new space and process what I had achieved. The feeling of walking through my own front door, knowing that every room belonged to me, was intoxicating. For the first time in my adult life, I had complete control over my environment. No roommates to negotiate with, no landlord who could change the rules, no family members weighing in on my decorating choices. If I wanted to paint a room purple, I could paint it purple. If I wanted to plant a garden or renovate the bathroom or knock down a wall, the only person I needed to consult was myself. I spent hours that first afternoon walking through each room, touching the walls, opening closets, imagining how I would make this house reflect my personality and preferences. The silence was profound and peaceful in a way I had never experienced. No television from the apartment next door, no arguments from the couple upstairs, no traffic noise from the busy street outside my old building. But even in this moment of pure joy, part of me felt the familiar tug of family obligation. Should I call my parents to share this news? Would they be proud of my achievement? Or would they immediately begin offering suggestions and criticisms? I decided to give myself a few weeks to settle in before breaking the news, just long enough to make the house feel like home before inviting their opinions and inevitable interference. It seemed like such a reasonable plan at the time, a small window of independence before returning to the family dynamic I had always known. I had no idea that my secret was already discovered, that plans were already being made that would challenge my ownership in ways I could never have imagined. The peaceful independence I thought I had earned was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible.
The following weeks were some of the happiest of my adult life. For the first time, I felt completely in control of my environment and schedule. I established routines that reflected my preferences rather than compromises with roommates or family expectations. Coffee in the backyard became my morning ritual, sitting under the oak tree with my laptop, reviewing the day's work priorities while listening to birds and neighborhood sounds. Working from home 2 days a week was a revelation. In my old studio apartment, working remotely meant sitting at a tiny desk 6 feet from my bed, distracted by the cramped space and thin walls. Now I had a dedicated home office with a window overlooking the garden, proper lighting, and enough space to spread out multiple monitors and reference materials. I joined the local community garden and signed up for a furniture restoration class at the community center. These activities connected me to my neighborhood in ways I had never experienced while living in temporary rental situations. Other gardeners shared advice about soil conditions and pest management. Fellow students in the restoration class became casual friends who would text photos of interesting pieces they found at estate sales. The sense of belonging extended beyond my house to the entire neighborhood. Morning walks revealed details I had missed during the house hunting process. The corner house with an elaborate butterfly garden, the family 3 streets over who kept chickens in their backyard, the retired teacher who had turned her front yard into a little free library that was constantly stocked with interesting books. But there were moments that gave me pause. Small incidents that seemed insignificant individually, but created a pattern of unease. Twice, I noticed an unfamiliar, dark sedan parked across the street, always gone by the time I could get a better look at the driver or license plate. Once, while unloading groceries from my car, I had the distinct feeling of being watched, though I could not identify the source of my discomfort. I dismissed these concerns as the normal paranoia of a woman living alone for the first time. My old neighborhood had been urban enough that strangers parked everywhere, but this suburban setting made unfamiliar cars more noticeable. I installed motion sensor lights around the property, telling myself it was a reasonable security precaution rather than a response to specific threats. Eleanor became a regular presence in my life, appearing with fresh baked goods and neighborhood updates. She had lived on our street longer than anyone else and served as an informal historian for the area. Through her stories, I learned about families who had come and gone, about the changes the neighborhood had experienced over the decades, about the sense of community that had persisted despite turnover. "This street has always attracted young families," Eleanor told me one afternoon as we sat on my porch sharing iced tea. "Professionals who want space and character, but still need to commute to downtown. You fit right in, though I have to say it is refreshing to see a single woman buying on her own. That was much less common when I was your age." Her comment made me curious about the demographics of my new neighborhood. During evening walks, I began paying attention to the households around me. Young couples with small children seemed to dominate, along with older empty nesters who had raised their families here and chosen to stay. Single-person households were definitely in the minority, which explains some of the surprised reactions I had received from neighbors who assumed I was married or living with a partner. About a month after moving in, I was working in the front garden when Eleanor approached with a thermos of iced tea and an old photo album tucked under her arm. We had fallen into a comfortable routine of afternoon conversations, and I looked forward to her visits as breaks from work and home projects. "I was going through some old albums yesterday," she said, settling beside me on the porch steps, "and I found something I thought you might find interesting. A picture from the 1970s of the whole neighborhood during a block party." She opened the album to a faded color photograph that showed my street decorated with balloons and tables set up for outdoor dining. My house was clearly visible in the background, looking remarkably similar to its current appearance, though with different colored shutters and less mature landscaping. "The Millers owned your place then," Eleanor continued, pointing to a couple visible on what I now knew was my front porch. "Lovely people. He was a teacher, she worked at the library with me. Before them, it was the Johnson family, and before that, I believe it belonged to a family named Anderson, the original owners, from what I remember." My heart skipped at the mention of Anderson, my mother's maiden name, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "Anderson? That is interesting. Do you remember anything about them?" "Not much personally. They moved away before I moved to the street. But your real estate agent mentioned something about the house staying in the family when she came by after your closing. Something about how nice it was that the house had come full circle back to the original family line. I assumed that was why you chose this particular house." The blood drained from my face. "What exactly did she say?" Eleanor looked concerned by my reaction. "Just that it was wonderful when houses stayed in families across generations. She seemed to think you were related to the original owners. You did not know about the connection?" I shook my head slowly, my mind racing with implications I did not want to consider. Anderson was a common surname. It could be a coincidence. But the timing of Julia's comment, combined with my family's recent questions about my living situation, suggested something more deliberate was happening. "Eleanor, when exactly did Julia come by? And did she mention my family specifically?" "It was maybe a week after you moved in. She said she had some final paperwork to drop off, though she could have mailed it. She asked about how you were settling in, whether you had family nearby. When I mentioned that neighbors were curious about the young woman who had bought the Anderson place, she smiled and said something about how some things are meant to be." The pieces were beginning to form a picture I desperately did not want to see. Had the house I had fallen in love with independently not been as random a choice as I had believed? The real estate agent I had trusted might have been working with my family behind the scenes. The secret I thought I was keeping might already be known to the very people I was trying to avoid involving. That evening, I decided to test my suspicions with a carefully planned phone call to my mother. Our weekly conversations were typically predictable affairs, where she updated me on Isabella's children and local gossip, while I shared edited versions of my work life. This time, I would steer the conversation toward family history and see how she responded. "Mom, I was thinking about Grandma Rose recently," I began after the usual pleasantries about weather and work. "I was wondering about her early life. Did she and Grandpa ever live in the city when they were young, or were they always out in the suburbs?" There was a brief pause before my mother answered, and I could hear a subtle shift in her tone. "They had a place in the city when they first married, somewhere on the north side, I think. Why are you asking about that?" "No particular reason. I was walking through an older neighborhood recently, and the houses reminded me of stories Grandma used to tell about her first home. I was curious about which area it might have been." "Which neighborhood were you walking through?" Her voice had definitely developed an edge now, alert and slightly suspicious. Westridge Gardens, I said, naming my new neighborhood while trying to sound casual. Really beautiful old houses there, gray architecture from the 20s and 30s. The silence that followed lasted so long I thought we might have lost the connection. I could hear muffled voices in the background, as if my mother was covering the phone to speak with my father. Mom, are you still there? Yes, I am here. Her voice was tight and controlled. Mia, is there something specific you need to tell us? Your father and I were just talking about how we have not seen your apartment in over a year. We have been wondering about your living situation. The question felt loaded with implications I was not ready to address. Nothing specific. I was just walking around appreciating the neighborhood, and it made me think about family history. Well, speaking of housing situations, Isabella and Tyler are going through a difficult time right now. Tyler lost his sales position last month, and they are looking for a more affordable living situation. My father and I are helping them search for something suitable for the children. We might have found something perfect, actually. A charming older home with enough bedrooms for everyone and a nice backyard for the kids to play in. The coincidences were piling up in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. What neighborhood are you looking in? Oh, different areas. We're keeping our options open. Family helps family, Mia. The implication that I was somehow failing in this regard hung in the air between us. Anyway, when are you coming for dinner? It has been weeks since we have seen you, and the children keep asking about Aunt Mia. I made a vague excuse about work being busy and a project deadline, then ended the call as quickly as possible without seeming rude. But within minutes of hanging up, my phone pinged with a text message from Isabella. Mom says you were asking about Grandma's old house. Weird coincidence. We're actually looking at houses in that area. Where are you living these days? Still in that tiny studio on the north side? I stared at the message, my suspicions crystallizing into something closer to certainty. The timing was too perfect, the questions too specific. Somehow, someway, my family already knew about my house purchase. The only question was how much they knew and what they planned to do with the information. I did not respond to Isabella's text, but I couldn't stop thinking about the implications. If they knew about the house, they also knew I had kept the purchase secret from them. They would interpret this as a betrayal, evidence that I did not trust them or value their input. In their minds, my secrecy would justify whatever response they were planning. That night, I lay awake in my beautiful master bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together how my secret had been discovered. Julia's connection to my family seemed like the most likely explanation, but I couldn't understand why she had not disclosed this relationship during our working partnership. Professional ethics require real estate agents to reveal potential conflicts of interest, and representing a buyer while having family connections to the sellers or their interests would definitely qualify. I made a mental note to research Julia's background and look into whether her behavior constituted an ethics violation. But more immediately, I needed to understand exactly what my family knew and what they might be planning. The conversation with my mother had felt like a fishing expedition, as if she were trying to determine how much I knew about their knowledge of my situation. The pattern of questions about my living situation, about family history, about the specific neighborhood suggested they were building towards something. Isabella's text about looking at houses in the same area could be innocent coincidence, but combined with everything else, it felt more like reconnaissance. I realized that my peaceful weeks of independence were about to end whether I was ready or not. The family drama I had tried to avoid was coming for me, and I needed to prepare for whatever confrontation lay ahead.
The next evening, I decided to investigate the family history connection more thoroughly. I dug through the closing documents for my house purchase, looking for any clue about previous ownership that might explain Eleanor's comments about the Anderson family. The chain of title showed 6 previous owners going back to the 1950s, but no family names appeared in the records. I remembered my great-aunt Jane, my mother's aunt, who had always been the family historian. Jane was in her 80s now, living in a retirement community in Sarasota, Florida. We had never been particularly close, but she had always sent thoughtful birthday cards and graduation gifts. More importantly, she had an encyclopedic memory for family genealogy and stories that went back several generations. I found her contact information in my phone and called that evening, explaining that I was working on a personal project about family history. Jane was delighted to hear from me, as always, and eager to share whatever knowledge she could. Aunt Jane, I was wondering about Grandma and Grandpa Anderson's early married life. Did they ever live in Chicago? Specifically in a neighborhood called Westridge Gardens on a street called Sycamore? There was a long pause before Jane answered, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight I had not expected. How did you find out about that house, Mia? Did your mother finally tell you the story? My heart sank as I realized my suspicions were correct. So it is true. They did own a house there. Oh, yes, they certainly did. It was their very first home after they married in 1948. Your grandfather saved for 3 years to afford the down payment, working double shifts at the steel mill, while your grandmother took in sewing to add to their savings. They were so proud of that little house. Jane's voice grew warm with the memory as she continued. They lived there for 17 years, from 1948 until 1965. All 3 of their children were born in that house, your mother, your Uncle David, and your Aunt Carol, who died as a baby. Your mother spent her first 10 years there before they moved to the suburbs for better schools. What happened to the house when they moved? They kept it as a rental property for many years. Your grandfather was very attached to it, always said it was the first place where he felt like a real American, like he had achieved something substantial. He used to drive by periodically to check on the tenants and make sure the property was being maintained properly. Jane paused, and I could hear her taking a sip of what I knew would be her evening tea. When your grandfather died in 1988, he left the house to your mother and Uncle David with very specific instructions. He wanted it to stay in the family for future generations. He talked about how someday one of his grandchildren might want to live there, how the house could be a foundation for the next generation. But they sold it, I said, though it was not really a question. Yes, they did. About 15 years ago, when the housing market was at its peak. Your Uncle David needed money for his business. He was trying to expand his consulting firm and needed capital for equipment and office space. Your mother wanted to help Isabella and Tyler buy their first house after Tyler's first bankruptcy. I had not known about Tyler's bankruptcy, though it explained some of the financial struggles they had experienced early in their marriage. So it is true. They sold Grandpa's house to help Isabella. It was not an easy decision, Jane said diplomatically. There were many family discussions about it. Your Uncle David felt terrible about breaking his father's wishes, but his business was failing, and he was desperate. Your mother was torn between honoring her father's memory and helping her daughter start her adult life. What about helping me start my adult life? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. James sighed softly. You were still in college then, focused on your studies. I do not think they saw you as needing that kind of help at the time. And honestly, Mia, Isabella was the one asking for assistance. She and Tyler were struggling with their first child, and family dynamics being what they were, your parents felt more obligation to help the daughter who had followed traditional expectations. Did anyone consider that I might want the house someday? That I might appreciate that family connection? I raised that question at the time, Jane admitted, but your mother said you were so focused on your career and education that you would probably want something modern and convenient when you were ready to buy. She thought the old house would be too much maintenance for someone with your lifestyle. The irony was devastating. My family had sold a house that was meant to stay in our family, using the proceeds to help my sister, while assuming I wouldn't want the very thing I had just bought unknowingly. They had made decisions about my preferences and needs without ever asking me. Aunt Jane, who else knows about this house connection? Did my parents tell Isabella about the family history? Oh, yes, Isabella knows all about it. Your mother was quite emotional about selling the house at the time. She told Isabella how much it meant to your grandfather, how he hoped his grandchildren might live there someday. I think Isabella felt guilty about being the reason they had to sell it. My stomach dropped as I realized the full scope of what was happening. Isabella did not just know about the house, she felt entitled to it because of the guilt and obligation created by its sale. In her mind, my purchase was not a coincidence, but a betrayal, taking something that rightfully belonged to her family. Aunt Jane, one more question. When my parents sold the house, did they ever mention wanting to buy it back someday? Did they talk about it as a temporary loss? Your mother mentioned several times over the years that she regretted the sale. She would drive by the house occasionally and wonder about the families living there. She always said that if it ever came back on the market, she would want to find a way to bring it back into the family. The conversation with Jane lasted another 20 minutes as she shared more details about my grandparents' time in the house, but I was barely listening. My mind was spinning with the realization that my family had not just discovered my purchase, they had been waiting for this house to become available again. They saw my ownership not as an achievement, but as an obstacle to their own plans. The irony was almost too perfect to be believable. I had purchased my first home in secret to avoid family interference, only to discover I had unknowingly bought the very property my family felt entitled to claim. The peaceful independence I thought I had earned was about to become the centerpiece of a family war I had never seen coming. The realization that this confrontation was inevitable filled me with both dread and determination. I had worked hard for this home, to give it up without a fight. 3 days after my conversation with Aunt Jane, I returned home from work later than usual. Our team had gone out for a colleague's birthday dinner, and I had stayed longer than planned, enjoying the camaraderie and celebrating a successful product launch. It was nearly 9 p.m. when I pulled into my driveway, feeling relaxed and content after a good day. The moment I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, I sensed something was wrong. Nothing was obviously disturbed or missing, but small details caught my attention immediately. A dining room chair was slightly out of its usual position. The throw pillow on my couch had been moved from the left side to the right. Most tellingly, there was an unfamiliar coffee mug in my kitchen sink, a white ceramic mug with blue flowers that definitely did not belong to me. Someone had been in my house. My first instinct was to call 911, but as I reached for my phone, I remembered the security system Ethan had installed during my housewarming party. He had insisted on cameras in the main living areas, activated by motion detection, explaining that single women living alone needed to prioritize safety. At the time, I had thought he was being overly cautious, but now I was grateful for his foresight. With shaking hands, I opened the security app on my phone and navigated to the day's footage. The timestamp showed several motion-activated recordings from the afternoon, and what I saw made my blood run cold. At 2:15 p.m., a silver Honda Accord pulled into my driveway. I recognized it immediately as my parents' car. My father got out first, followed by my mother, and then my sister Isabella emerged from the back seat. They approached my front door with confidence, as if they had every right to be there. My mother reached into her purse and produced a key, an actual key to my house. She inserted it into the lock and turned it, but nothing happened. She tried again, jiggling the key and pushing on the door, her body language showing increasing frustration. My father leaned over to examine the lock, and they huddled in conversation on my porch for several minutes before returning to their car and driving away. But that was not the end of it. The next clip, timestamp 3:45 p.m., showed them returning with a fourth person, a man in work clothes carrying a small case of tools, a locksmith. I watched in disbelief as my father spoke with the man, gesturing at my door and apparently explaining the situation. The locksmith examined the lock, shook his head, and appeared to ask questions while my father showed him some kind of paperwork. The conversation continued for several minutes, with the locksmith looking increasingly uncomfortable. Eventually, he packed up his tools and left without changing anything, while my family stood on the porch looking frustrated and defeated. But they did not give up. The final clip showed them returning once more at 4:30 p.m. This time, my mother had a different key, presumably from a different source. When this second key also failed to work, my father looked directly up at the doorbell where one of Ethan's cameras was hidden. His face registered surprise and then concern as he seemed to realize they were being recorded. They left quickly after that, but not before I saw my mother peer through the front windows and Isabella walk around to the back of the house, presumably trying to find another way in. I sat on my couch, trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. My family had not just tried to enter my house without permission. They had made 3 separate attempts in a single afternoon. They had brought a locksmith to change my locks. They had multiple keys to my property. The violation was so extreme, it seemed surreal. But the most disturbing part was their obvious sense of entitlement. They had not knocked or called first. They had not left a note explaining their visit. They had approached my home as if they had every right to be there, as if my ownership was somehow temporary or negotiable. I called Maya immediately, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I had discovered. "They did what?" she exclaimed after hearing my story. "Mia, that is breaking and entering, or at least attempted breaking and entering. How did they even get keys to your house?" I have no idea, though I was beginning to suspect Julia's involvement went deeper than I had initially realized. The real estate agent must have given them copies, but I cannot understand why she would do that without my permission. "This is insane," Maya said. "You need to call them right now and demand an explanation, and you might need to call the police if they show up again." I can't believe my own family would do this to me. I mean, I knew they were controlling, but this is criminal behavior. "Put them on speaker," Maya instructed. "I want to hear their explanation for this insanity." With Maya still on the line for moral support, I called my parents' home phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. My father answered on the second ring, his voice carrying its usual calm authority. "Mia, is everything okay? You never called this late." "No, everything is not okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my anger. "I know you came to my house today. I know you tried to get in with a key. And when that did not work, you brought a locksmith to change my locks. I want an explanation right now." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. I could hear muffled voices as my father presumably told my mother about my call and what I had discovered. "Mia," my mother's voice came on the line, and I knew immediately that she was in damage control mode. She only used my full name when she was preparing to justify something she knew was wrong. "We were going to call you tomorrow to explain everything. We didn't realize you had changed the locks already." "Changed the locks?" I was incredulous. "Mom, how did you even know where I live? How did you get keys to my house in the first place? And why did you think it was okay to enter my home without permission?" "We have known about the house for several weeks," she said, as if this should have been obvious. "Julia Rodriguez is my cousin Maria's son-in-law. When she told us you were buying the Anderson house, we could hardly believe the coincidence." My real estate agent. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Julia had not just failed to disclose her family connection, she had actively facilitated my parents' access to information about my purchase. She'd probably given them updates throughout the entire buying process. That still doesn't explain why you thought you could just walk into my house, or why you brought a locksmith. What were you planning to do? My father took the phone back, his voice carrying the reasonable tone he used when he thought he was being the adult in a situation. Now, Mia, don't be dramatic. We were not breaking in. That house belonged to your grandparents. We have a right to be concerned about what happens to it. You have no rights to my house, I said firmly. I bought it legally, with my own money. The fact that my grandparents once owned it does not give you any claim to it now. We tried calling you, my mother shouted in the background. We never answer when we want to discuss important family matters. What important family matters? And why not leave a message or send a text instead of trying to break into my house? My father's voice became more serious. The situation, Mia, is that we've been planning to help Isabella and Tyler purchase that house. We've been watching the market for years, waiting for it to become available again. When Julia told us it was for sale, we began arranging financing to buy it for them. The words hit me like a physical blow. You were planning to buy my house for Isabella? It was supposed to be for them, my mother confirmed. They need the space for the children. Tyler has been looking for steady employment, and we thought having the stability of owning the family home would help them get back on their feet. But I bought it first. I stated what should have been obvious. You bought it without telling us, my father replied. If you had communicated with your family, we could have worked something out. Now we have a situation that needs to be resolved. And with those words, I realized that the battle for my home had officially begun.
What exactly do you mean by worked something out? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. We could have helped you find something more suitable for a single person, my mother explained in the patient tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. Something smaller, more affordable, easier to maintain. The Anderson house is really too much for one person. Too much for one person, I repeated. It is a 3-bedroom house, not a mansion. Plenty of single people own homes this size. But why do you need 3 bedrooms? Isabella's voice came through the phone, apparently having joined the conversation. Tyler and I have 3 children who need their own space. You just have yourself and your computer. The casual dismissal of my space needs, the reduction of my life to yourself and your computer, stung more than I had expected. My space requirements are not the issue here. The issue is that I bought this house legally and you tried to break into it. No one was breaking in, my father insisted. We had keys. We were coming to discuss the situation with you. Keys that you obtained without my knowledge or permission from my real estate agent, who apparently violated professional ethics by sharing information about my purchase with her family members. There was another uncomfortable silence before my mother spoke again. Julia was just trying to be helpful. She knew about the family connection and thought we would want to know. Helpful? I was nearly shouting now. You gave me unauthorized access to my property. That is not helpful. It is illegal. You are overreacting. Tyler's voice joined the conversation. We are family. We are not some random criminals trying to rob you. You brought a locksmith to change the locks on my house without my permission. How is that not criminal behavior? We brought a locksmith because your locks were different from the ones we expected. We thought maybe the previous owners had changed them and forgotten to give you all the keys. The explanation was so absurd, I almost laughed. So you decided to hire someone to break into my house rather than calling me to ask about it? We tried calling, my mother repeated. You were always too busy to answer. I answered when you called last week. You never mentioned anything about wanting to discuss my house or needing to come over. We were still figuring out how to approach the situation. We did not want to upset you unnecessarily. Well, mission accomplished on the upsetting part, I said sarcastically.
Maya, who had been listening silently on my end of the call, gestured for me to put them on speaker so she could hear better. The conversation was surreal enough that I wanted a witness to confirm I was not imagining the level of entitlement my family was displaying. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, speaking slowly and clearly. "You found out about my house purchase through my real estate agent, who is apparently related to you and shared confidential information without my consent. You obtained keys to my property without my knowledge. You came to my house 3 separate times in one day trying to gain entry. You brought a locksmith to change my locks. And you think this behavior is justified because my grandparents once owned this house?" "When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it was," my mother said defensively. "How can it possibly be worse than it was?" I demanded. "You violated my privacy, my security, and my legal rights as a homeowner." "We are your family," Isabella said, her voice rising with emotion. "We are not strangers. We have a connection to that house that goes back decades." "A connection you gave up when you sold it 15 years ago. You cannot claim family rights to a property you voluntarily sold to help Isabella buy her first house." "That is different," my father said. "We sold it out of necessity, not choice. If we had known you would want it someday, we might have made different decisions." "But you never asked what I might want someday. You assumed I would prefer something modern and convenient. You've made decisions about my preferences without consulting me, just like you always do." The conversation was spiraling into years of accumulated resentment, but I couldn't stop myself from voicing frustrations I had kept buried for too long. "This is not about the past," my mother said firmly. "This is about the present. Isabella and Tyler need that house more than you do. They have children to think about. And I have my own life to think about. I worked for 5 years to save for this house. I sacrificed and planned and earned this on my own. You cannot just decide it belongs to Isabella because she has children." "Be reasonable, Mia," my father said firmly. "You are one person. They are a family of 5 who are about to be homeless. Then help them find another house. Help them the way you helped them when you sold the family house the first time. But this house is mine." "You're being selfish," Tyler said bluntly. "We need that house. Our lease is up in 3 weeks and we have nowhere else to go." "Your housing crisis does not create an obligation for me to give up my home," I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. "Some sister you are," Isabella said bitterly. "I can't believe you would put a house above your own family. I can't believe you would expect me to give up my house because you did not plan ahead for your housing needs." The argument continued for another 10 minutes, with accusations and counter-accusations flying from both sides. Years of suppressed resentments came pouring out about favoritism, about financial support, about expectations and obligations that had never been clearly defined but were always implied. Isabella accused me of being selfish and unsupportive throughout our entire lives. Tyler complained that I had never offered to help them during their financial struggles. My parents lectured me about family loyalty and putting relationships before material possessions. I fired back with examples of their favoritism, their interference in my life choices, their assumption that my needs were less important than Isabella's wants. "You've always been jealous of Isabella. Since you were children, you have resented her happiness and success." Success? I was incredulous. She has never held a job for more than 2 years. Tyler has gone bankrupt twice. They have been evicted from 3 different apartments. What part of that constitutes success? "She has a family," my father said firmly. "She has built a life centered on love and relationships rather than career advancement and material accumulation." The implicit criticism of my life choices stung, but it also clarified something important. This was not really about the house at all. This was about fundamentally different values, different definitions of success and different ideas about what mattered in life. In my family's view, Isabella's choices, marriage, children, financial dependence on family support, represented the correct path. My choices, education, career, financial independence, were seen as selfish deviations from proper priorities. Finally, my father interrupted the chaos with an announcement that chilled me to the bone. Enough. We are coming over tomorrow evening to discuss this in person. Clearly, we cannot resolve this over the phone. I am not welcome in my house, I said firmly. If you want to discuss anything, we can meet in a public place. That house has been in our family for generations. We have every right to see what you've done with it. You have no rights to my house at all, and after today's attempted break-in, you are definitely not welcome inside. We will be there at 6 p.m. tomorrow, my father said, as if I had not spoken. We can work this out if everyone is willing to be reasonable. After they hung up, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Maya, who had heard every word through the speaker, was the first to break the silence. Mia, this is completely insane. They are treating you like a child who took a toy from her sister. This is your house that you bought with your own money. I know, I said weakly, but they clearly do not see it that way. What they see does not matter. What matters is legal reality, and the legal reality is that you own this house, period. End of story. Maya was right, but I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the family conflict that was about to explode. They are coming tomorrow night, whether I want them to or not. Then you need to be prepared. First, call a lawyer. You need to understand your legal rights and options. Second, document everything that happened today. Print out the security footage, write down exactly what was said during this phone call. Third, consider calling the police to report the attempted break-in. I cannot call the police on my own parents. Why not? If strangers had tried to break into your house 3 times in one day, you would not hesitate to call the police. The fact that they are related to you does not give them the right to violate your property. I knew Maya was right, but the thought of involving law enforcement in a family dispute felt like crossing a line I could not uncross. Let me try talking to them first. Maybe if I explain my position clearly, they will understand. Based on what I just heard, they are not interested in understanding your position. They want your house, and they think emotional manipulation will convince you to give it to them. After Maya left, I spent the evening researching my options. I found the contact information for Rachel Goldstein, a lawyer who specialized in real estate and family law. I printed out screenshots from the security footage showing my family's multiple attempts to enter my house. I wrote detailed notes about the phone conversation, including specific quotes that demonstrated their sense of entitlement to my property. I also researched the ethics rules for real estate agents, confirming that Julia's behavior had violated multiple professional standards. She had failed to disclose her family connection to my parents, shared confidential information about my purchase, and provided unauthorized access to my property. I drafted a complaint to the State Real Estate Commission. The next morning, I called Rachel's office and explained my situation. She agreed to see me that afternoon on an emergency basis. Based on what you have told me, your position is very clear, Rachel said after hearing my story. You are the legal owner of the property. Your family has no claim to it whatsoever, regardless of its history or their expectations. Could they try to make a legal claim based on the fact that it was once family property? I asked. The chain of title is clean. Your mother and uncle sold the property legally years ago. The fact that you subsequently purchased it does not create any right of reversion to other family members. Rachel recommended documenting all interactions with my family regarding the house, changing all locks and security codes, and sending a formal cease and desist letter if they continue to pressure me or attempt to enter my property without permission. What about the real estate agent? She gave copies of my house keys to my parents without my knowledge or consent. That is a serious ethical violation, Rachel confirmed. You should report her to the State Real Estate Commission. You might also have grounds for a civil complaint if you choose to pursue it. Armed with legal advice and reassurance, I left Rachel's office feeling more confident. I stopped at a home improvement store to purchase additional security measures, a video doorbell, window sensors, and motion-activated floodlights for the yard. I called my locksmith and arranged for him to change all the exterior locks immediately. At exactly 6 p.m., I watched through my new video doorbell as not just my parents and Isabella arrived, but Tyler and all 3 of their children as well. They had brought the entire family, as if this were a casual dinner visit rather than a serious confrontation about property rights. Emma, who was 8, ran up to my front door and pressed the doorbell repeatedly while the adults gathered on my porch. I could hear her excited voice through the intercom. "Is this really going to be our new house, Mommy? Which room will be mine?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. They had not just planned to take my house. They had told the children it was going to be their new home. They had created expectations and excitement in 3 innocent kids who had no understanding of the adult drama unfolding around them. I opened the door before they could attempt to use whatever keys they might still have. "I did not realize everyone was coming," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We thought it would be good for you to see the whole family," my mother replied, ushering the children inside without waiting for an invitation. "Mia, you remember Emma, Logan, and little Mason." The children filed past me with wide eyes, taking in the house they believed was about to become their home. Emma immediately ran to the reading nook under the stairs. "This will be perfect for my books," she announced. "Can I put my bookshelf here, Aunt Mia?" "Emma, we talked about this," Isabella murmured without conviction. "Nothing is decided yet." "Let us all sit down and discuss this like adults," my father said, heading for my living room. I followed, determined to remain calm despite my anger. Once everyone was seated, my mother suggested the children go play in the backyard while the adults talked. Tyler's brother would be coming soon to take them for ice cream during the discussion. When the children were outside, I turned to my family. "Before anyone says anything else, I want to make it absolutely clear. This is my house. I bought it legally with my own money. I had no idea about its connection to our family until after I moved in, and I certainly had no idea you were planning to buy it for Isabella." Isabella burst into tears. "It is not fair, Mia. You know we have been struggling since Tyler lost his job. The landlord is selling our rental, and we have to be out by the end of the month. Where are we supposed to go?" Tyler leaned forward aggressively. "Your sister has 3 kids, Mia. 3. What do you need all this space for? Just you and your laptop?" "My personal space requirements are not the issue here," I said firmly. "The issue is that you seem to think you have some claim to my home." "We have keys," my father said. "Or at least we had keys before you changed the locks without telling us." "How did you get keys to my house in the first place? I never gave you any." My mother looked away. "Julia had an extra set from the showings. She thought we might want to see the place given the family connection." "That is completely unprofessional and possibly illegal. You gave keys to a house that did not belong to you without the owner's permission." "Why are you being so difficult about this?" Isabella cried. "We need this house more than you do. The kids have already picked out their rooms." "You told your children they were moving into my house without even speaking to me first." "We tried to call you," my mother repeated. "You never answer when we need to discuss family matters." The argument escalated from there. with the same accusations and justifications repeated in increasingly emotional terms. Isabella accused me of selfishness and jealousy. Tyler threatened legal action based on the family connection. My parents lectured me about obligation and loyalty. Finally, I'd heard enough. I stood up and walked to the built-in cabinet where I had placed the folder Rachel had helped me prepare. "I want to show you something," I said, laying out legal documents on the coffee table. "This is the chain of title for this house going back to 1948. This is the deed showing when my grandparents bought it. This is the deed showing when you and Uncle David sold it 15 years ago to help Isabella buy her first house." My mother paled as she recognized the documents. "This house was sold legally. You used the proceeds to help Isabella, who then lost that house to foreclosure. You made a choice to prioritize her immediate needs over Grandpa's wishes for the property to stay in the family. That was your right as the owners." I pulled out another document. "This is my deed showing that I purchased this house legally with my own money. I am now the owner, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Finally, I produced a formal letter on law firm letterhead. "This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney demanding that you stop attempting to enter my property without permission and stop making claims of ownership or family rights to this house." The room was silent as they processed what I was showing them. "I am willing to help you find another house," I said gently. "I can assist you with your housing surge or even offer a loan toward a security deposit. What I cannot and will not do is give up my home." Isabella stood up abruptly. "Fine, keep your precious house, but don't expect us to pretend we are a happy family anymore." "If that is your choice," I said sadly, "but this house is mine, and that decision is final." One by one, they left, collecting the disappointed children from the backyard. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. I had lost my family's approval, but I had kept my home and my self-respect. Standing in my living room, surrounded by the furniture I had chosen and the life I had built, I realized that sometimes the most important battles are the ones where you fight not to gain something, but to keep what is already rightfully yours. This house was more than just a building. It was my independence, my achievement, my proof that I could make my own choices and live with the consequences. The family drama was over, but my real life was just beginning.